Welcome to the Deep Dive.
And welcome back.
This deep dive is brought to you by Cloutfit.ai. Cloutfit.ai connects influencer outfits directly to your product inventory, making their content instantly shoppable and driving more sales and higher order value. You can see how it works at Cloutfit.ai. That's Cloutfit.ai.
Yeah, we really appreciate Cloutfit.ai's support.
Okay, so today we're plunging into the insights from, well, a genuinely fascinating book, The Sales Acceleration Formula, using data, technology, and inbound selling to go from $0 to $100 million by Mark Roberge.
And what makes this journey really compelling is the author's background.
Right.
Mark Roberge, he wasn't some seasoned sales exec. He was actually the 4th employee at HubSpot.
Right.
And he came from an MIT engineering background, no prior sales experience at all.
Which just completely reframes the challenge, doesn't it? He wasn't just, told to sell things. His mission was to engineer, that's the word, scalable, predictable revenue growth. So he brought this scientific, metrics-driven, process-oriented mindset to sales, which, as he points out, people often see as more of an art form.
Yeah, it's like taking something that feels intuitive, maybe even unteachable sometimes, and trying to make it repeatable, measurable, and optimized. Just like an engineer would design a system.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack the core concepts and these formulas he's developed to build that predictable sales machine. And importantly, see how you, the listener, can maybe apply this engineering approach to your own growth challenges, particularly perhaps within a fashion e-commerce context. Can we actually apply science to style?
It's a great question. Roberge, he distilled his whole methodology down into 4 sort of foundational components. He calls them formulae. But he's clear these aren't simple equations. They're more like comprehensive systems.
Right.
Repeatable processes, metrics, calculations. The 4 are the sales hiring formula, the sales training formula, the sales management formula, and the demand generation formula.
So basically, predictable ways you hire, train, manage, and then feed leads into your sales engine.
That's it.
And he says optimizing just one of these can be a massive lever for growth. But for him, the most critical starting point was hiring.
That's right. That's where we'll start. Formula 1, the sales hiring formula. Roberge identifies what he calls a core paradox here.
Okay.
The ideal salesperson. Well, it's unique to every single company. It's defined by its specific buyer context.
Like, selling high-end bespoke suits requires a totally different approach, different personality than selling, say, fast fashion accessories online.
Totally different.
The buyer, the product complexity, the sales cycle, it's all different.
Exactly. A star in one context might completely flounder in another. However, and this is the key, the process for discovering and engineering that ideal hire profile for your specific context, well, that process is universal.
Okay, so there's a repeatable method, a scientific method almost, for identifying your perfect fit. What does that look like?
It's basically a 4-step engineering loop. First, you define the ideal characteristics based on your buyer context.
Right.
Second, you design specific evaluation strategies for each trait, behavioral questions, role plays, exercises. Third, you rigorously score candidates against these traits. He really emphasizes using tools like scorecards, discipline over fancy tech, especially when you're starting out.
Scoring helps you get past just the gut feel, right? Look at the data.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And fourth, and this is crucial, you learn and iterate. You track how your hires perform, you revisit their interview scorecards, and you refine your definition of the ideal candidate based on who actually succeeds in your environment.
So instead of just guessing, you're using data from your own hires to actually improve your predictive model over time.
Exactly.
Okay, so what were HubSpot's key criteria, as an example, specific to their context in those early days?
Well, they landed on 5 core traits that strongly correlated with success for them: coachability, curiosity, prior success, intelligence, and work ethic.
And these weren't just random picks, right? They were tied specifically to HubSpot's challenges at the time.
Absolutely. Selling their product required educating buyers in this new, rapidly changing industry. So intelligence and curiosity were just vital.
Makes sense.
And it was an evangelistic sale, so coachability was key. Plus, tackling a new market demanded a really strong work ethic. And prior success, well, that offered some objective validation.
Okay, let's get practical. How did they actually evaluate these traits in an interview setting? Coachability, for instance.
Coachability was often tested with a role play. They'd have the candidate do it, then ask them to assess their own performance. Then they'd offer feedback and ask the candidate to redo the role play.
Ah, okay.
And they weren't looking for perfection the second time. They were looking for the candidate's effort to apply the feedback. Can they actually course correct?
That's smart. You're testing the process of learning, not just the initial performance. What about curiosity?
This showed up in the questions the candidate asked. Did they ask things that genuinely made the interviewer stop and think? Nobody's ever asked me that before kind of question.
Right.
And in role plays, do they use discovery questions to really understand the prospect's world, or do they just jump straight into pitching? For fashion e-commerce, say, you might look for curiosity about customer trends or styling details or the mechanics of online returns even.
Prior success seems like it would be the most straightforward one.
It is, if you can verify it. You look for objective metrics,
Oh, yeah?
team size, rank on the team, attainment against quota, bookings.
The hard numbers.
Exactly. But always verify with references
Mm-hmm.
and ask specific questions about how they achieved that success, not just that they did.
Good point. How did they test intelligence? That seems harder.
They essentially started the training process during the interview. They introduced complex material related to the business, like inbound marketing concepts back then, or maybe SEO basics.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'd see if the candidate could absorb it, discuss it intelligently, maybe even apply it in a later interview or role play.
So can they learn fast, basically? And work ethic.
That was primarily behavioral questions,
Yeah.
asking about their typical day, what activities they prioritize. You're looking for evidence of self-motivation, a proactive approach. What do they do when things are slow?
Okay, so you've built your scientific profile, your evaluation process, but Roberge says the hardest part isn't evaluating candidates, it's actually finding great salespeople in the first place. Why is that?
Because, as he puts it quite bluntly, great salespeople never need to apply.
Uh-huh, right.
They're usually happy and successful where they are, relying just on job applications, especially early on. Well, it yielded almost zero hires for HubSpot.
So you need a proactive approach. You can't just wait for them to come to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This solution was pretty radical at the time. Build a recruiting agency within your company. Treat recruiting like a sales function itself. Focused on passive recruiting, cold outreach, networking, and measure it like sales. Outbound candidate touches, connections made, screens, interviews, hires.
Like applying the sales process to recruiting makes sense. What sourcing techniques actually worked for them?
LinkedIn search was powerful, obviously. Using filters to target people from companies known for good sales training, or specific schools or majors that correlated with success in their model.
Mm-hmm.
But the most effective technique, he says, was leveraging connections for what he called forced referrals.
Forced referrals. That sounds a bit intense.
It sounds intense, but it's quite clever. It means using your network, especially people like past managers of candidates who've left companies or maybe people you've helped in the past.
Okay.
You'd send them, say, the list of potential candidates from LinkedIn who used to work for them and ask directly, who are the absolute top performers on this list? Who would you rehire in a heartbeat? It bypasses the formal reference check and often gets you really honest insights.
That's smart. And gathering market intelligence, even from candidates who maybe aren't a perfect fit for you right now.
Oh, crucial. Interviewing people, even if they're not right, helps you understand the local talent landscape. What are other companies paying? What's their buyer context like? Who are the known top performers in your market? All that intelligence feeds back into your strategy.
Before we move off hiring, a quick thought on the very first sales hire. Roberge considers different archetypes, maybe an experienced SVP of sales or a hashtag one-rank salesperson from another company, or maybe more of an entrepreneur type. Who does he argue is the best choice, especially for a growing company?
He makes a really strong case for the entrepreneur.
That feels counterintuitive, not the experienced sales leader with the Rolodex or the proven quota crusher.
Well, he argues the SVP's network is often overrated now, especially with inbound. And while a top performer is great, they usually need structure and coaching, which you might not have early on. For an early-stage company, the most valuable contribution of that very first sales hire isn't just bringing in the first dollars. It's actually accelerating product market fit.
Ah, by being super close to the first customers, understanding their real problems, and feeding that information directly back to product development.
Precisely. An entrepreneur type usually has that instinct. They dig into the buyer's day-to-day reality, their challenges.
Mm-hmm.
In fashion e-commerce, for instance, that first hires insight into customer-style challenges or fit issues or friction points in the online shopping experience. that could be absolutely invaluable for improving the product or the website itself.
That completely reframes the value proposition of that first hire. It's not just sales, it's market intelligence and product feedback.
Exactly.
Okay, so once you've engineered your hiring process, brought in the right people, Formula 2 is the sales training formula. What was the problem with traditional methods like ride-alongs?
Well, the classic ride-along model, just shadowing a top performer, fundamentally, it isn't scalable or predictable. But more subtly, it can actually hinder new hires. Because top performers, they each have their own unique superpower.
Right.
Right. One might be amazing at building rapport. Another might have encyclopedic product knowledge. If a new hire just tries to copy that one person,
They might not develop their own strengths or
Yeah.
try to force a style that just isn't natural for them.
exactly, you want them to find their own authentic voice and approach, not just be a pale imitation of someone else.
So what's the foundation for scalable, predictable training then?
It starts with a really well-defined sales methodology. This typically includes mapping out the buyer journey. So the steps the buyer takes from maybe realizing they need a new outfit for an event, to researching options, to finally choosing where to buy it.
Right.
Then defining your sales process, the steps your salesperson takes, making sure they align perfectly with that buyer journey. Think prospecting, discovery call, maybe a virtual styling session, closing. And finally, establishing a clear qualifying matrix, the criteria you use to assess if a prospect is actually a good fit for what you offer.
And making the stages of that sales process inspectable is really key, isn't it? Like objective milestones.
Absolutely critical. Stages need to be objective checkpoints you can verify.
Yep.
Discovery verified is good. Did the customer explicitly confirm their needs and budget? Influencer bought in is bad. That's subjective, hard to confirm consistently.
Okay. So how do you add predictability and rigor to the training itself?
Through exams and certifications. Exams test the foundational knowledge, product details, process steps. They can be stressful, sure, but they ensure everyone has that base understanding.
And certifications.
Certifications test the qualitative skills needed for each stage of the sales process, usually through role plays, evaluated against a detailed rubric with quantifiable scores. And importantly, he recommends having evaluators other than the direct hiring manager.
To reduce bias, make sure it's an objective skill assessment, not just affirming your hiring decision.
Precisely. You're testing the skill itself. Now, beyond process, how do you actually manufacture helpful salespeople, advisors, not just pitch deliverers?
Yeah.
Roberge really emphasizes training salespeople to live the buyer's experience. At HubSpot, sales hires had to build their own websites and blogs using the software. They felt the pain points of being a marketer firsthand.
So for fashion e-commerce, maybe that means having sales hires actually try navigating the website like a customer, ordering something to see the whole unboxing experience, maybe even trying to create content like a fashion blogger would.
Exactly. It builds genuine empathy and credibility. They can speak authentically about the buyer's world because they've dipped their toes in it.
Makes sense.
And another key part was enabling salespeople to build their personal brand on social media, positioning themselves as thought leaders, as trusted advisors in their space.
So not just pushing product links.
Definitely not. It was about active participation, sharing others' relevant content, adding value in discussions, helping people first, then occasionally promoting their own useful content. Like becoming a known, helpful voice in the online communities where fashion buyers actually hang out.
He tells that great story about the Fortune 500 VP coming to HubSpot for marketing strategy advice, not just product info.
Yeah, that's a perfect illustration. That's the power of inbound thought leadership. It turns salespeople into magnets, drawing prospects in because they're seen as credible advisors rather than just constantly chasing prospects out.
Okay, moving on. Formula 3, the sales management formula. Roberge recasts managers not just as bosses, but as sales coaches.
That's the core idea. And the central principle here is metrics-driven sales coaching. The manager's primary job is to use data, activity data, results data from the salesperson to diagnose the single biggest skill deficiency that's holding them back right now.
But single has one.
Yes. Then, craft a laser-focused coaching plan to help them improve just that one thing.
Not giving them a whole laundry list of everything they could possibly do better.
Right, that just overwhelms people and nothing changes. You focus on the biggest bottleneck, the constraint.
How do the metrics help diagnose that bottleneck?
You start with a high-level funnel view. Leads generated or received. Leads actually worked. Demos or consultations given. Deals closed. You look at the conversion rates between stages. Where does this salesperson deviate significantly from the team average or from the top performers.
Okay.
So if they work lots of leads but get very few demos booked,
Mhm.
well, that's a flag.
And then you peel back the onion.
Exactly. That's the phrase he uses. You look at deeper metrics to understand the why. Is their leads work to connect rate low? Meaning they're struggling just to get prospects on the phone or reply to emails.
Mhm.
Or is their connect to demo rate low? Meaning they're connecting but struggling to pique interest or build value on that initial call.
Yeah.
Identifying that specific bottleneck tells the coach exactly what skill to focus on. Maybe it's outreach technique versus discovery questioning skills.
The data points you directly to the root cause for coaching. Smart.
Agree.
Beyond direct coaching, motivation through sales compensation plans and contests is obviously vital too.
Absolutely. Comp plans are notoriously tricky, though. There's really no one-size-fits-all perfect plan. It depends so much on the business stage and goals.
So what makes a good plan?
He suggests evaluating plans based on 3 factors. Is it simple? Can salespeople easily understand how they get paid? Is it aligned? Does it directly incentivize the results and behaviors the business needs right now, like maybe driving higher average order value or encouraging repeat purchases in e-commerce?
Right.
And is it immediate? Does performance quickly translate into financial outcome, or is there a long lag?
And involving the sales team in designing the plan helps with buy-in, presumably.
Oh, crucial. He talks about HubSpot involving their team in town meetings to discuss and evolve their comp plans as the business needs changed. They shifted focus over time from just closing new deals to customer success metrics to reduce churn, and later even to customer commitment metrics like getting annual prepayments. It shows comp plans aren't static. They have to adapt to drive the right behaviors at the right time.
Okay, so comp plans are the long-term structure. Sales contests are more like the short-term motivators.
Exactly. They're temporary, focused on a specific short-term goal like boost demos this month, or maybe focus selling on a new product category. And they can be fantastic for building team culture.
What are the best practices for running contests?
He highlights a few. Make them team-based rather than individual. This encourages collaboration and helping teammates, rather than cutthroat competition or even cheating. He actually saw this play out. A team contest had much better overall results and morale than a similar individual one.
Interesting.
Keep them relatively short, maybe monthly is often ideal, and provide frequent updates of daily standings are key to keeping engagement high. People need to see the progress.
He mentions that funny contest where the winning team actually had a negative score because the goal was forecasting accuracy and they were terrible at forecasting initially.
Right, which was exactly the point. The contest wasn't just about winning cash, it was about driving awareness of a critical weakness, poor forecasting, and motivating a change in behavior. The negative score just highlighted how much they needed to improve. It worked.
That's clever. Okay, finally on management, developing new sales managers. It's not just about promoting your top salesperson, is it?
Definitely not. That's a classic mistake. Management requires a totally different skill set. Coaching, leading, process optimization, strategic thinking. It's not just about being great at individual selling.
So how do you identify and train potential managers?
His test for potential manager candidates was very practical. He'd have them hire, train, and manage one new salesperson while still carrying their own individual sales quota.
Wow, a real-world audition.
Exactly. It quickly reveals if they can actually balance their own work with coaching responsibilities and if they truly have the aptitude and desire for leadership, by just the title.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, last big piece, Formula 4, the demand generation formula. This is where the empowered buyer, the internet, really changes the game.
Absolutely. The internet has fundamentally shifted the power dynamic. Buyers today, they do extensive research online before they ever dream of contacting a salesperson.
They're scrolling Instagram for style inspiration, checking reviews on retail sites, watching how-to style videos on YouTube or TikTok.
Exactly. So the traditional outbound playbook, cold calls, interruptive emails, direct mail, it's just much less effective. It feels interruptive because buyers are already on their own information journey. Modern demand generation has to be primarily inbound, meaning creating valuable content and engaging online in helpful ways so that qualified buyers find you when they're actively looking for solutions or information.
So how did HubSpot build their inbound machine? What were the core tactics?
It really boiled down to 2 main pillars. First, consistent, high-quality content production. Blogs, guides, ebooks, webinars, all focused on topics genuinely relevant and helpful to their target buyer persona.
Stuff people would actually search for.
Right. And second, frequent, valuable online participation in the communities and platforms where their buyers were already conversing. LinkedIn groups back then, maybe specific forums, social media today.
And that online participation, it isn't just blasting out links to your own stuff, right?
Far from it. His rule of thumb was something like 1/3 your own useful content, 2/3 sharing or engaging with others' relevant content. Focus on adding value, answering questions, building relationships, networking, help first. For fashion e-commerce, that could mean joining relevant style forums, engaging thoughtfully on Instagram posts, maybe participating in discussions about sustainability in fashion or new trends.
But this inbound approach, it doesn't yield results overnight, does it?
Definitely not. He uses the analogy of weight loss. It requires consistent effort over time. You don't see a massive change day to day, but the cumulative effect of months of consistent quality content and genuine participation builds authority, trust, and eventually significant organic traffic and leads.
So how do you make that content production scalable and sustainable?
One key insight was hiring journalists. They're skilled at interviewing experts, extracting key information, and structuring it into compelling, easy-to-understand content.
Instead of expecting the subject matter experts to also be great writers.
Exactly.
Right.
Form a thought leadership committee of your internal experts, then establish a repeatable process, maybe weekly interviews, where a journalist extracts insights from different experts. It taps into that internal knowledge much more efficiently.
And focusing on the long tail. What's that about?
It's about optimizing content, not just for the big, broad, super competitive keywords like dresses or shoes.
Which are hard to rank for anyway.
Great. Instead, you target more specific, niche phrases that buyers use when they have a very particular problem or need. Things like how to style wide-leg pants for pear shape, or best non-iron shirts for travel, or sustainable alternatives to leather handbags.
People searching for those longer, more specific long-tail terms are usually much further along in their buying journey or have a very defined need. They're highly qualified leads.
Precisely. And collectively, owning hundreds or thousands of these niche long-tail terms can actually bring in more valuable, ready-to-buy traffic than fighting tooth and nail for those top generic head terms.
Okay, so you're generating these inbound leads through great content, but not all inbound leads are created equal, right? How do you manage them effectively? He wasn't a fan of overly complex lead scoring algorithms.
No, he found they often became these mysterious black boxes that didn't accurately predict real buying intent. People could rack up points doing things that didn't signal readiness to buy.
So what's the alternative?
He prefers using a buyer persona buyer journey matrix. You basically map out your key ideal buyer types. Maybe for fashion, it's direct consumer trend focused, direct consumer budget conscious, small boutique owner.
Okay.
And then you map their typical stages of awareness or journey, maybe problem need discovery, solution research, vendor brand selection.
And then you analyze the conversion rates for leads that fall into each cell of that matrix. Like how many trend-focused consumers in the solution research stage actually convert to customers.
Exactly. The data might show you that for some segments, passing leads to sales early works well. But for others, maybe like those small boutique owners in his example, conversion rates were much, much higher if marketing nurtured them longer with more content until they clearly reached that brand selection stage.
So the matrix, based on your data, tells you when a specific type of lead is actually sales ready. It prevents sales from wasting time chasing unqualified prospects too early.
Right. And you can even microsegment further within that matrix if you have complex situations like different fashion sub-niches or international versus domestic buyers, etc.
Okay, so sales finally gets a properly qualified inbound lead. How should they engage? What's the right technique?
Well, it's basically the opposite of a generic pitch, he says. Scrap the elevator pitch, lead with context.
Lead with context.
Yeah. Use the information you have about how that buyer engaged. What ebook did they download? What specific product pages did they visit on your site? What search terms brought them there, if you know? Use that context to personalize your initial outreach and immediately offer relevant value.
So instead of the generic, hi, I'm calling from awesome fashion brand, we sell great clothes.
Right.
It's more like, hi, I saw you downloaded our guide to styling sustainable fabrics, and I noticed on your Instagram you're really passionate about ethical fashion. I had an idea about how our new recycled cashmere line might fit into that.
Exactly. It immediately shows you've done your homework, you understand the potential interest, and you're there to be helpful, not just to sell something generically. He contrasts those generic voicemails with HubSpot's highly contextual examples. The difference is night and day.
Makes sense. He also shares that going negative voicemail tactic for late-stage follow-up.
Yeah, the sort of last-ditch voicemail. Hi, haven't heard back, so I'm assuming topic is no longer a priority for you right now. It sounds a bit abrupt, but he claims it has a surprisingly high callback rate.
Why does it work?
Probably because you've hopefully already provided significant value earlier in the process. This final message creates a little urgency or FOMO and prompts people who are still interested to clarify. But you can only use it if you've earned the right by being helpful previously.
Okay. And the call low, then call high strategy.
That's about leveraging initial contacts. If your inbound lead is from, say, a marketing assistant, engage them first. Build rapport, provide value relevant to their role. Then leverage that relationship and context to get introduced to, or at least have a reason to call, the decision maker.
So you can say, "Hi, decision maker. I've been working with Sarah on your team regarding topic related to their engagement, and she mentioned your company is focused on relevant goal. We actually helped a similar brand achieve X. Would you be open to a brief chat?"
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're using those internal champions, armed with relevant context, to get a much warmer introduction higher-ups.
Smart.
And the final point on inbound sales technique. Prioritize prospecting by level of engagement. Don't just call leads alphabetically or based on when they came in.
Use technology to see who's active now.
Right. Use your sales tech, CRM, sales enablement tools to see real-time buyer activity. Who's visiting your website pricing page right now? Who just opened your follow-up email? Who mentioned your brand on social media? Prioritize calling the people who are actively demonstrating interest and engagement today.
Yeah, someone browsing your new arrivals page for the third time this afternoon is probably a much hotter lead than someone who downloaded a general style guide 6 months ago and hasn't been back since.
Precisely. Technology should empower the salesperson by giving them exactly that kind of context, allowing them to sell better and sell faster.
Which brings us nicely to the final section, technology and experimentation. Roberge has a clear view on modern sales tech. It should be built for the salesperson, right?
Yes, fundamentally, it should enable them to do two things. Sell faster by automating admin tasks, logging calls, making templates easy, and sell better by providing that crucial buyer context we just talked about right when they need it.
Think about CRM features that instantly show a fashion buyer's past purchase history, their wish list items, maybe recent interactions with customer support or social media comments, all in one place.
Exactly. That data isn't just for managers to run reports later. It's a real-time guide for the salesperson to have a more helpful, more personalized, more effective conversation now.
And technology that truly empowers the salesperson like that, well, it ultimately provides richer, more accurate data for managers anyway. It's a win-win.
It should be.
Okay, last piece, experimentation. Why is this so critical to his whole formulaic approach?
Because, as we said at the start, your buyer context is unique. What worked perfectly for HubSpot or any other company probably won't work exactly the same way for you, blindly copied. You must test, measure, and iterate to discover what actually works best in your specific market, with your specific buyers, selling your specific products.
And fostering an innovation culture is key to actually getting those experiments off the ground. It can't just be top down.
No, absolutely. You need to encourage employees at all levels to propose ideas for improvement, have dedicated forums for testing these ideas, maybe internal hackathons or regular experiment review board meetings. Burge even suggests having a formal innovation career track to reward employees specifically for driving tested, proven improvements, not just hitting quota.
So what are the best practices for actually running these experiments effectively?
First, define a really clear, quantifiable goal. How will you measure success or failure? Make it objective. Second, design the experiment for the lowest possible time and investment needed to just test the core hypothesis. Don't overbuild. Third, choose a passionate leader for the experiment, someone who really believes in the idea. Fourth, assemble a small team. And crucially, include some of your top performers in that test group.
Why specifically top performers?
They help you find what he calls a true negative. If your absolute best salespeople, the most skilled and motivated ones, can't make a new idea or process work, even in a small, controlled test, then it's highly unlikely the broader team will succeed with it.
Right. It saves you from rolling out a fundamentally flawed idea widely.
Exactly.
Yep.
And finally, have regular scheduled check-ins to review the data from the experiment and make clear decisions. Do we kill it? Do we continue funding it? Or is it successful enough to scale?
He shared a couple of really powerful examples of this in action. The VAR program, the value-added reseller channel.
Yeah, that was a completely new sales channel idea that came from an employee, Pete Caputa. Initially, leadership was pretty skeptical, but Roberge allowed a very small, very low-resource test. Pete basically did it nights and weekends, targeting just 5 initial customers.
A tiny pilot.
Tiny. But Pete proved the model worked. They looked at the metrics, LTV/CAC proved it was profitable, and they gradually scaled it based on that data. It eventually became a massive revenue stream for HubSpot, all originating from an employee's idea that was allowed to be tested in a contained way.
A contained risk, carefully managed, with huge potential upside. And the other example, iterating on the qualifying matrix itself, moving from BANT to GPCT.
Right. They felt BANT, budget, authority, need, timing, wasn't sufficient for the complexity of their sale anymore. They needed a better discovery framework, so they developed GPCT, goals, plans, challenges, timing. But instead of just rolling it out, they tested it.
How?
With the small pilot group, their top 5 salespeople, and their best sales coach. The goal was very specific. Achieve a measurable improvement, like 10%, in key metrics like discovery quality, conversion rates, productivity.
And by testing with the best, again, they could see if the concept itself was viable before pushing it to everyone.
Precisely. The pilot group absolutely crushed their metrics. Proving GPCT wasn't just theoretically better, it worked in practice for top performers. And crucially, something interesting happened. Other salespeople on the floor saw their top peers succeeding with this new method and started organically adopting it themselves, even before the official rollout.
That's powerful internal validation when your colleagues start copying it because it works.
Exactly.
So wrapping this up, Mark Roberge's book, The Sales Acceleration Formula, it really provides this detailed blueprint for applying an engineering mindset, using data, process, metrics, iterative testing to build a growth engine that's scalable, predictable, and importantly, specifically adapted to your unique buyer context.
Yeah, it covers the whole life cycle. From scientifically hiring the right people specifically for your needs, training them in a predictable way, coaching managers using data, generating demand through modern inbound methods, leveraging technology to actually empower the salesperson, and building a culture where testing and learning are just constant.
It's a really powerful counterpoint to that traditional view of sales as being purely some kind of unpredictable art form.
Which brings us to the question for you, the listener, especially if you're in a field often seen as creative, like fashion e-commerce. If you start applying this kind of rigorous, data-driven engineering approach to your growth, focusing on predictable processes, measurable outcomes, constant iteration, does that ultimately amplify your creativity and innovation by giving it structure and feedback? Or does it somehow constrain it? Can science and style truly be engineered together for predictable success?
That's definitely something we're thinking about. This deep dive into engineering predictable growth has been brought to you by Cloutfit.ai. Remember, Cloutfit.ai connects influencer outfits directly to your product inventory. It makes their content instantly shoppable, driving more sales and higher order value for your brand. You can find out more at Cloutfit.ai. That's CLOUTFIT.ai.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.